Hi, it's Mark Bernard, and I'm here from the Bernard Institute for Cybersecurity Excellence, and I'm presenting lesson number 3 in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And this lesson will be from the module Identify, the first module, and the lesson will be on governance. I'm using the reference model throughout the implementation of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, just simply because it provides a simple way of looking at 108 controls. Today, again, we're talking about governance, and it comes from the module under Identify. The degree of difficulty, we're trying to take you from basically zero, having like little or no knowledge, basically of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, to having a much better understanding and hopefully being able to use it in your work on a daily basis. Once you're at that position, we suspect that over a period of time that you will develop better skills, improve your skills. You'll be able to troubleshoot problems within this cybersecurity framework. You'll also be able to audit it if you choose to become an auditor, or become an architect and design new NIST implementations. The goals of this lesson are, number 1, organizational cybersecurity policy is established and communicated. Second goal is cybersecurity roles and responsibilities are coordinated and aligned with internal and external partners. Goal number 3, legal and regulatory requirements regarding cybersecurity, including privacy, civil liberties, obligations, are understood and managed. And goal number 4, governance and risk management processes address cybersecurity risks. Now, I've created some questions to help with the process. So, for instance, how was the cybersecurity policy approved and communicated in your organization? Are internal roles and external partners aligned and coordinated? Will legal or regulatory requirements for cybersecurity, privacy, and civil liberties be managed? Have risk mitigation action plans for cybersecurity been approved, communicated by the Governance Committee? The Governance Committee, pardon me, usually when I establish the Governance Committee, I use a document called the Terms of Reference. It's a small document. It's like 2 or 3 pages, but it's signed off by the Chief Executive Officer. And the Chief Executive Officer has to approve the attendance of his highly paid and highly prized executive team members. In the Perfect Governance Committee, you have the executive team from each of the portfolios within the organization attending the meeting. It's usually done a little more frequently at the beginning, but eventually it will be quarterly or semi-annual once the program stabilizes. It's the Governance Committee's job to make sure that whatever the legal obligations, such as regulations or statutes or internal facing or external facing contracts, are followed and addressed. They take this information with the help of the leader for the NIST cybersecurity program, and they look at the vulnerabilities, threats, and the business impacts, and they deduce some type of risk and make decisions on that risk. And the risk leads to policies that get created. Policies are probably the simplest type of control that an organization could implement. It's a simple document signed off by senior management. And that document provides some kind of instruction to employees. Here's how we want you to behave with regards to mobile devices or mobile working, teleworking, working from home. There may be a number. How do you handle information? How do you handle sensitive information? There may be a number of different policy areas that are addressed. And of course, it should also translate into the job descriptions of the employees. Employees should have to follow whatever the policies are of the organization, and so should third parties for that matter. Okay, so first question. How was the cybersecurity policy approved and communicated in your organization? The cybersecurity policy needs to address several key risk areas, such as working remotely or teleworking, the handling of secret authentication information, And in case you don't know what secret authentication information is, it's basically your user, password, and your account in order to log into the environment. So it shouldn't be shared in an email. Your password should be maybe created by yourself, or maybe someone from the account management group calls you on the phone and helps you set up an account. But you should never share your password or any kind of authentication information. So that also includes tokens or keys or anything that you have that you use to validate who you are to get into the network. Use of encryption. Policy might include the use of encryption, because we don't want people to use their own encryption, because that leaves the potential of the organization being locked out of any type of information that's about the organization. So we want to have a policy that says you'll follow the organization's encryption process and you won't implement your own, for instance. The protection of information. So the continual protection of information handling generally. This is something that's important to every organization, and users need to understand that. Cybersecurity policy needs to be drafted and reviewed by department executives. So those people that are on the governance committee, they should be the people who are reviewing and approving the policy. The cybersecurity policy is approved finally after it's been reviewed by the governance committee, by the president, and then it's communicated out to all staff. The communication process needs to include awareness training to engage employees. So employee engagement in the cybersecurity program is very essential in order to succeed with the program, because the program will affect all areas of the organization that handle digital information, and that pretty much includes everybody these days. But it will be a change for people because they're not used to having a cybersecurity program and they don't know what it's all about. So there needs to be some awareness and some communication going on in order to help that digital transformation process succeed. Employees need to know what this policy is used for and how they expect to apply it. Are internal roles and external partners aligned and coordinated? Cybersecurity roles and responsibilities for employees need to be documented. So they need to be documented in job descriptions, but they may also be documented in RACI charts. And human resources generally works with the hiring manager in order to document what it is that the employee will be doing. Sometimes the job description is used over and over and over again. Sometimes it gets reviewed on an annual basis. Sometimes there's new jobs that need to be justified. There's a number of different reasons why human resources will work with the hiring manager to document what goes into the job description, including the roles and responsibilities. Cybersecurity roles and responsibilities for external partners need to be documented during the RFP procurement process and then documented within the agreement. This is an important step. If you don't document the roles and responsibilities, then after you sign the contract, the vendor won't follow whatever it is that you ask them to do. So you need to make sure, the whole basis of the negotiation process is to make sure that you get what you want for your organization if you're outsourcing or hiring somebody to help you with the process. But before you can get what you want, you need to know what it is that you want, and you need to document it in the RFP process. So it's a catch-22. You need to have it in there, or else you're probably not going to get what you want. Internal and external roles can be coordinated by using carefully designed and executed service level objectives based on a risk management methodology and integrated with service desk ticketing and incident handling. So it's possible to harmonize what a priority one means in risk management, on the service desk, and also finally with the third-party vendor provider. You can also document in the agreement with them what it is the type of behavior that you expect when they see a priority one. What should they be doing? So for instance, they should be picking up the ticket, they should be opening the ticket, and they should be actioning the ticket. And if it's a critical or an extreme, they should be resolving the problem within 2 hours or 4 hours. If it's not a critical and it's like a high or a medium risk, then what they should be doing is putting it into a list of things to do, and they have 10 days or 30 days to resolve that issue. Now, it should be reviewed by the service manager, of course, when the time comes, to make sure that they're following it. And as part of the agreement, you should have what is the acceptable rate of failure. If you have the service level objective in there, can they fail 1% of the time? Can they fail 10%? Usually it's a pretty high level because you want them to do what it is that you've asked them to do, so you keep the number pretty high. So it's like 99.9% of the time you're supposed to follow this. If you fail, decimal 0.1%, then okay, but don't do it again. Kind of. So it's all about managing the behavior of the third parties. Each month, the service manager of the supplier relationship management process will need to review with the external services and review those SLAs that we just talked about. On an annual basis, a risk assessment or an audit of the external party's compliance with roles and responsibilities needs to be conducted. So in some organizations, my team has done security architecture reviews to make sure that on an annual basis that the organization who's working with us is following our security standards. And you have the right to audit. That's in all contracts, right? So doing a security assessment once a year is not a big deal, right? Should be done. Question 3. Will legal and regulatory requirements for cybersecurity, privacy, and civil liberties be managed? So most organizations that I have seen, this is not done. So even if they have general counsel on staff or they have a general counselor on retainer, getting a list of the regulations or laws that the organization are supposed to follow is almost impossible. So you can plan on whatever cybersecurity program it is that you implement, that you're going to be doing this probably from ground zero and building this out. But this is very, very important. And we'll talk about the reason why it's important a little bit later on. As you know, this is lesson 3 of 23. So we have a number of different topics to talk about. And we'll finish this one a little bit later. A legal registry must be created, listing all the applicable laws, regulations, internal facing and external facing. So for example, a law would be the corporate incorporation law. So a lot of companies in the U.S. get incorporated in the state of Virginia for some reason. So in the state of Virginia, they have an incorporation law, and all these businesses that are registered there need to follow that law. A regulation might be something like the PCI, data description specification, right? So PCI is not a law, it's a regulation, and people need to follow that, as well as doing SOC audits and reviews. The SOC is not necessarily a law, but it's a regulation that needs to be followed. Internal facing contracts are the licenses that we have. So when we license Microsoft products or other products, Adobe or what have you, there's in the agreement, and when you read the agreement, there'll be some specific verbiage about how when we use their product, we must protect it from being stolen. So their intellectual property is being licensed to us. We need to protect it while we're using it. So for example, if we have offshore services being provided and we allow them to use our licensed products, if they decide that they're going to take it and misuse it, then the organization may be liable for theft of intellectual property from the third party that we've licensed from. So we need to be very careful about how we manage the internal facing contracts. The external facing contracts are the contracts that we have with our partners or with our customers. So these are the ones where we do provide a certain service or a product and we get revenue in return. And so we need to follow those rules as well. Analysis of the legal registry and its laws, regulations, contracts strives to identify clauses requiring confidentiality of information, the integrity of information and the processes, and the availability of information. Any applicable law, legal clause can be mapped to an independent list of controls used by the organization. These controls have been reviewed and approved by the governance committee. So we will build a registry, if you like, of controls that have been approved. And the reason why we do that is so that if other organizations or other external parties try to impose new levels of control on us, we have a process for dealing with that. So we will send that to the governance committee, and the governance committee will decide if they want to implement new controls. Because basically, implementing a control framework costs money, and money comes from the revenue stream. So at some point, we talked earlier in lesson 1, I think it was, about balancing the value of the information with the investment in the security. And we need to take that into close consideration when we're reviewing the legal clauses and trying to identify what our obligations are. Because we don't want to build a Fort Knox to protect information unless we're actually legally obligated to, because it is expensive to maintain. Information handling procedure and information classification schema are used to train employees on the application of security controls, standards, processes, and tactics used to maintain legal compliance with information privacy laws and security laws. Okay, so the information handling practice becomes a very important process because, as you can imagine, the front office people probably aren't that familiar with technology and security. They're probably not that interested in it. That's not what they do. So the simple way to deal with that is to give them one process that they have to follow, and then provide awareness training and engage them in the process, and then follow up with them, of course, to make sure they're following the process. And that process is the information handling and classification procedure. And it will go through a list of different types of activities that go on during information handling, and it'll have applicable security controls listed for each of the classifications so that they know it's in black and white what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Question 4. Have risk mitigation action plans for cybersecurity been approved and communicated by the governance committee? Has a risk assessment been completed for cybersecurity related processes? That should always be the first question. When people say you have an exposure, you want them to quantify it. You don't want a qualitative statement. Qualitative is just based on opinion. You want it quantified. You want them to prove that there's some kind of exposure that you haven't addressed. Doing regular risk assessments will help to identify all the exposures and bring them down to an acceptable level where management can sign off on it. Examples of cybersecurity risks include infrastructure, third-party processing, public networks, and removable media. These are just a few examples of where risks can grow. Findings from the risk assessment are listed in the risk treatment plan. So we do a risk assessment, we write a report, and we take the findings of that report and we create action plans, corrective action or preventative action plans depending on what's required. And then we present this in the risk treatment plan to the governance committee and ask them to approve or reject the risk so that we can deal with it. Corrective action plans and preventative action plans needs to be developed. We develop it with the assigned manager. So when we're doing our asset inventory, we assign responsibility for each of the assets to a manager, full-time employee who's on board. And it's their job to make sure that they sign off and review any kind of changes to the controls around those assets. So the CAPA is something when we find a gap or a risk exposure, we work with the designated manager and come up with a plan on how we're going to resolve that. And when we do that generally before we present the risks to the governance committee, in case they ask questions, how are you going to fix this? We want to make sure we already have that answer. Use independent internal audit to validate closure of cybersecurity risks. So we don't want the same people who are fixing the problem to review their own work and say, okay, I did a great job. We want somebody who's independent because that provides a level of assurance to senior management that the process and the program are working as planned. The cybersecurity manager will update the risk treatment plan for review by the governance committee until the cyber risk has been eradicated or reduced to an acceptable level. And then once it's resolved, then it drops off the RTP. Okay, so let's do some practice. Again, if you're in a workshop or a seminar with the Barnard Institute of Cybersecurity, then we would walk through these and I would review them and help you to refine these processes. But if you're on your own, then you need to do this just to improve the transfer of knowledge, okay? So these are activities designed to help you learn more about the cybersecurity goals for governance, in this case, for lesson 3. So draft a communication piece announcing a new cybersecurity policy. So if you've never drafted a communication piece, this is a good exercise to go through. Create a list of legal obligations. So you can begin, use your Excel or Word document and start listing them out. And I do recommend that you break them out into the 4 categories. So you have laws, and then you have regulations, and then you have internal and external facing contracts. Document cybersecurity roles and responsibilities. So this is a pretty easy thing. If you have a copy of the RACI chart, you can, on the left-hand side, you can list all the different tasks that can happen within that process. And then across the top, you can list all the job titles. We generally don't put names in any of our documentation because names change, titles don't so much. So if we put names in things, we would be changing our documentation more frequently. And we only want to review our documentation once a year. So update those roles and responsibilities. Draft a risk mitigation corrective action plan. Prioritize a list of cybersecurity risks. So what's more important because of the exposure is greater, and what's less important. Okay, what tasks, what risks does the cybersecurity policy address? Improve laptops, teleworking, public transportation, remote access, encryption, printing, protection of information, or secret authentication. What do you say? If you say teleworking, that's correct. If you say remote access, that's also correct. Encryption, definitely important. And the protection of information, equally important. And protection of secret authentication information, because we don't want people logging onto your account and creating mayhem, because we're going to come and ask you about it later. So you don't want that to happen. Question 2. Where are internal and external roles documented? Is it documented in the service management plan? Are these roles documented in the organizational chart or the contract? Or are they documented in the office floor plans? Are they documented in the process workflows, job descriptions? How about, are they documented in the annual recognition party? Or how about business continuity? If you said service management plan, that's correct. If you said documented within the contracts, that's also correct. And also on the process workflows, because we want to know where the handoffs are going and who they're going to. And also in job descriptions. That's it. Test number 3. What are 4 categories of legal obligations? So we have foreign, internal facing contracts, regulatory, international, ordinance, company policy, external facing, or statutory. What do you say? Do you say internal facing contracts? That's correct. And if you said regulatory, that's also correct. And external facing? Also correct. And statutory. So statutory are the laws. Perfect. Test number 4. What are 4 major areas of cybersecurity risk? Removable media, desktop computers, lawyers, infrastructure, human resources, third-party processing, payroll, or public networks. So where do you see the biggest risk for cybersecurity? If you said removable media, that's correct. Some organizations don't allow any removable media. Some of them give the employees what we call a thin client. And on the thin client, there are no USB ports, there's no flash drive ports, there's no CD-ROM, there's nothing that you can use to copy data out of and take it with you. If you said infrastructure, that's also correct. If you said third-party processing, that is also correct. And if you said public networks, of course. That's the whole reason why we have cybersecurity. It's because of the public network that we call the internet. All right, our progress chart. We're making progress. Okay, we've got 5 courses to go through: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. We've got 23 lessons in total within the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Where are we today? We finished 1, we finished 2, and now we're finished 3. And we only have 3 left, and we'll be done. Identify. Lesson completed. I want to thank you for your time and attending the course and this lesson. And I hope that you join us for lesson number 4, which is coming up. We enjoy sharing this knowledge with you, and look forward to more engagements with you. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.